Tomorrow morning, legends and rituals from around the world and how they're represented in art. The Art of Magic continues this new series at 9:05. Teaching today is in 20 minutes with techniques that will help you develop creative writing in younger children. Now on BBC Two, a journey deep into Irish history.
The unsettling of a nation is an easy work. The settling is not.
"30 years after the plantation, life in Ulster was still hard. The Irish professed loyalty to King Charles I of England, but many still wanted to recover lands lost to the newcomers. They thought themselves humiliated by those who scorned the Catholic religion and the old Gaelic way of life. These feelings of discontent were to fuel a desire for revenge, and in the autumn of 1641, events came to a head with the outbreak of a great rebellion.
It had been no hard matter to have been a prophet, to have foreseen those black clouds engendering in the Irish air, which broke out afterwards into such fearful tempests of blood.
On the evening of the 22nd of October, Sir Phelim O'Neill, who was a very prominent figure in County Tyrone society, he was a Justice of Peace. He was an Irishman, but he had integrated very well into the new order. He went to visit his friend at Charlemont, Lord Caulfield. It wasn't unusual because he often had dinner with Lord Caulfield, but on this occasion Sir Phelim arrived with a troop of very badly disciplined and very ill-organised soldiers. The idea, of course, was to take Charlemont, and this was to be the first step in a rising which was eventually to engulf all of Ulster.
Sir Phelim O'Neill assumed authority in Ulster, and on the 24th of October issued a proclamation at Dungannon.
Every person should make speedy repair unto their own houses, under pain of death, and that no further hurt be done to anyone, under the like pain.
While the proclamation promised no injury to the king's subjects, all over the north the situation was already getting out of control. In South Derry, Moneymore was taken by the rebels, and the towns of Magherafelt and Ballachy plundered and burnt to the ground.
All through that period from 1609 to 1641, if you look through the letters and the official dispatches and so on, you get the continuing note of fear among the planters, or at any rate of defensiveness. They were obliged to carry out certain obligations like building fortified farmhouses and so on, which was all part of the defence plan, the defence network.
These mischiefs and miseries cause us to stand continually upon our guard, and when we travel, we take good strength with us. Wherefore, might it please you, when you send those materials I wrote for in my last letter, also to send over some more arms, as muskets, calivers, powder, and bullets. The last calivers bullets you sent were all too big. Wherefore, if you please, to send 2 pairs of bullet molds, and lead were best, so they may be made fit for the pieces. Also, some halberds and half-pikes.
The settlers were rightly fearful for their lives and property. At Belturbet, County Cavan, a group of local colonists were seized by the rebels and led out to a nearby bridge. Most were thrown over the parapet to drown in the waters of the River Erne. Others were clubbed to death. It's said that one gentleman was so distracted that he laughed hysterically while being run through with a pike.
Rumours were flying all around the place. Many people simply decided to get even with those who they had had trouble with before. People that they owed money to, debts were simply liquidated by murdering them. People who decided to settle old scores. In many cases, protection rackets were set up. and people went from one person to the other, threatening to protect them, and if they didn't, the worst would happen to them. And in fact, in a number of occasions, we know that people were murdered by gangs because they simply didn't pay their protection money.
The Irish servant, which overnight was undressing his master in duty, the next morning was stripping master and mistress with a too officious tyranny.
What happened was that the rebels would come to a district, they would strip the Protestants of their clothes as well as their possessions. They would tell them that if they didn't leave the area within 7 days, then they would be massacred. So the Protestant community left the areas concerned. They left, in fact, in many cases naked. It was a very severe winter. There was snow on the ground at this time, and many of them did die of hardship, of cold, perhaps to some extent of shock. The Protestant settlers were systematically stripped, clearly with a symbolic intention. In other words, they'd come with nothing, they were to leave with nothing.
No one knows for certain how many people died in the course of these atrocities. It was probably about 2,000, although the number of victims soon became inflated to fantastic levels, far beyond the total Protestant population of the time. What is known is that what happened in that bloody autumn of 1641 was to influence events and attitudes in Ireland for generations to come.
Philip Taylor, late of Portadown in the county of Armagh, husbandman sworn, saith that about the 24th of October last, he, this deponent, was taken prisoner at Portadown by Toole McCann, a notorious rebel. At which time the rebels first took the castle, then they assaulted and pillaged the town, and burnt all the houses on the further side of the water. And then the said rebels drowned a great number of English Protestants, of men, women, and children in this deponent's sight, some with their hands tied behind their backs, and saith that the number of them that were then so drowned amounted to 196 persons.
This was a massacre which left a very, very dramatic effect on the Protestant mind at the time. For example, it's the only massacre after which ghosts appear, because some deponents claim that shortly after the massacre, for about a week, a spectral white figure appeared walking across the river, crying, "Revenge, revenge." And of course, this is one of the functions that ghosts had in 17th century belief, as in Hamlet's father, to cry, "Revenge, revenge," for wrongdoings that were done to them. And of course, right down to the present day, it's the only event from the 1640s which has actually made it onto an orange banner. So it's clearly made a very important impact on the Protestant mind.
I sometimes think a lot of our psychology really derives from that period, though we don't talk about it very much, and it doesn't figure very largely in the history books. Throughout the whole Protestant population, not just the Presbyterians, I think there developed in Ireland a sense of always having to look over their shoulder, which of course didn't improve matters, relations between the two religious groups in the population.
Almost inevitably, the rumours of massacre and atrocity were to lead to acts of vengeance on Catholics. In January 1642, members of the Magee family were murdered in Island Magee, County Antrim. In the popular imagination, many more Catholics were killed, driven over the Gobbins cliffs to their deaths.
You can interpret this in very widely different ways according to your modern psychology, according to your modern view of what the Irish problem really is. But there's no question about it that it gives rise to a sense of siege, a sense of beleaguerment. And the siege, if there is such a thing as a siege mentality, and if it's a factor in this situation, and it would be hard to deny it, then it really begins in the middle of the 17th century, by my reckoning.
In the summer of 1642, civil war broke out in England between King Charles I and his Parliament. No one living in Ireland could be sure if either King or Parliament would look after their own long-term interests. They also had to contend with several different armies of English, Irish and Scots who were operating throughout the country. In this confusion of shifting allegiances, Irish Catholics found themselves pulled in different directions. James Butler, Earl of Ormond, represented the King's interest and sought peace on terms acceptable to the Old English. Cardinal Rinuccini, the papal nuncio, hoped for outright victory and the return of the lands and liberties of Irish Catholics. Owen Roe O'Neill, with 30 years' experience in the Spanish service, held the best hopes of an Irish military victory. In 1642, leading Catholics from all 4 provinces of Ireland met in Kilkenny to set up a provisional government. It was called the Confederation of Kilkenny. The Confederation gathered the different factions together under the common banner of Catholicism. It drew up the first written constitution of Ireland. It also supported the Royalist cause and adopted the motto, "For the land of Ireland united." It was a call for unity that was to prove elusive as a confused war dragged on for several years. Owen Roe O'Neill was to win the only Irish victory of note when he defeated Munro's Scottish troops at Benburb, County Tyrone. Owen Roe was the nephew of the great O'Neill. But like his uncle, Owen Roe was unable to press home his advantage. Only one man was to prove strong enough to impose his will totally upon Ireland. That man was an Englishman, Oliver Cromwell.
He had 3 major characteristics. The first of those was that he was a superb general. There's no doubt at all about that. The second one was that he was a religious zealot. And again, there is absolutely no doubt about that. And the third one, which I think is very often forgotten about him, is that he was an English nationalist. And there are very, very few people in British history who have combined all 3 of those. A captain of men, a very, very convinced religious zealot of any description, and an English nationalist of maybe a type that wasn't seen before and possibly has never been seen since.
His first attitude towards the Irish was a strategic one, that the Irish were Catholic and that they were allied with Spain and France. And of course, throughout the 1640s, both Spain and France had supported Ireland during the war. So their Catholicism, allied with their continental powers, was for Cromwell a very considerable problem strategically.
Cromwell arrived in Ireland in August 1649 and straight away marched north to Drogheda. He was filled with a religious fervour and was determined to avenge what he saw as the wholesale slaughter of Irish Protestants at the hands of Catholics in 1641.
You broke the Union. You, unprovoked, put the English to the most unheard of and most barbarous massacre without respect of sex or age that ever the sun beheld, and at a time when Ireland was in perfect peace.
Cromwell himself, in his own religious beliefs, subscribed, of course, to the idea which was very common in the 17th century, that they were living in the last days. And there were all sorts of radical sects grew up around this. And Cromwell himself believed in the Antichrist. And he believed that the Antichrist was on the earth at that time. He identified the Antichrist.